Hello, welcome to Gia English Channel. Subscribe dong. Ngeri ngeri ngeri. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. Depend on wherever you are around the world. And in this video, we'll be speaking about critical thinking, logic, and problem solving. So, um, when you ask a person what is critical thinking, and I do believe there are numerous definitions of critical thinking from various schools of thought, but the intrinsic capacity to process and interact analytically with incoming knowledge could be one. And I think this interaction is accomplished by making observations and logically connecting disparate pieces of information. So here, critical thinking can also be referred as the ability to interpret information factually and reach a sound conclusions, of course. And I think it entails the assessment of information in informational materials like statistics, fact, observable phenomena, and research findings. And to solve problems or make decisions, I think critical thinkers can infer acceptable conclusions from collections of facts, and they usually distinguish between relevant and irrelevant elements, right? So when you use critical thinking, it means you analyze, you interpret, you evaluate, and you form opinions about what you read, what you hear, and what you say or write about something, right? So that what can we use when we do critical thinking? All right, and using critical thinking doesn't necessitate being pessimistic or fixating on flaws, right? Usually, it entails being able to focus your thoughts to dissect a situation or a piece of information, interpret it, and then use the interpretation to make a wise choice or judgment, right? And although no one is born with a critical thinking mindset, and people who continuously use it are said to have one, right? And I think these are qualities that can be acquired, can enhance with use and practice, right? So curious and reflective individuals are critical thinkers, right? And now I think they delve deeper and ask more questions to learn more and look for answers, right? And usually they also analyze claims, they analyze arguments, they distinguish between fact and opinions, and pose significant questions, of course, right? And they usually open to questioning their views and also have humility that enables them to to acknowledge ignorance or lack of understanding when necessary, right? So, what I mean here is critical thinkers are flexible in their thinking. They actively enjoy learning and also regard the research for new information as a lifetime endeavor, right? So this is maybe the most important quality in a critical thinker. And you know, for this time, I do believe you also will articulate yourself more effectively to read more critically and also efficiently, right? Because by gathering crucial information, you can think critically. You become a better thinker and problem solver with critical thinking, right? So, critical thinking is amplified by some fundamental abilities. Here, I want to share three fundamental abilities. The first is curiosity. Yeah, so the curiosity is here, the drive to find out more information, to gather more proof, and also be receptive to the concept of something. And the second is skepticism. Right? So here, skepticism entails not mindlessly trusting everything that you hear and having healthy skepticism about new information. That's what I mean by skepticism. And the third is humility. What I mean here by humility is acknowledging that your beliefs are mistaken in the face of fresh, compelling evidence, and also to the contrary, right? So let's see the critical thinking examples, where the situations that necessitate critical thinking vary by industry, right? Um, for example, tribunals evaluates the cases at hand and determines the treatment priorities, right? And also, a plumber assesses the material that would be most appropriate for a job, or maybe a manager examines the customer's feedback and use the data to create a training session for staff members or customer services, right? Or maybe an attorney examines the evidence and develops a plan to win the case or determine whether to settle outside court, right? So I think critical thinking calls for the use of reasoning skill, right? This is, I think, the essence. So I think being an active learner instead of a passive taker of information is key. So here, critical thinker fiercely contest ideas and presumptions rather than taking them at the best face value. Right? And I think the critical thinkers also are always open to learning that the assumptions, reasons, and conclusions accurately reflect the circumstance. Right? Critical thinkers will identify, they usually will examine and also resolve issues methodically, right? Rather than depending on intuition, or maybe we can consider it's like a gut feelings. And person asked me, one of my students asked me, what exactly does it mean to think critically? Right? Probably there are a lot of people who have different perceptions and perspectives about um, what does it mean to think critically. But for me myself, critical thinking is looking at things to determine the truth in situation, right? And I think it is based on evidence. of course, based on evidence, based on observations, and also based on the reason, right? So, to determine the optional course of action, I think it requires the capacity to look at the situation from various angles, right? And uh, for example, like um, there was an example in the past about a father who contemporary was a critical thinker uh, toward his son. Yeah. So according to him, critical thinking is as an active, right? And then also persistent, and should be careful consideration of a belief or supposed form of knowledge in the light of grounds which support it, right? And an individual with critical thinking abilities, they must be able to distinguish uh, or to differentiate between fact and opinion, and also they must be able to recognize the connections between concept, right? And they also examine various viewpoints, and they recognize the goals of others. They investigate the reasons for and against oppositions, and usually critical thinker considers how their presuppositions, ideas, and values are justified, right? And also they remain conscious of their thoughts. They always analyze the significance and applicability of arguments and concepts. They also recognize and they construct and evaluate arguments. They also identify logical contradictions and mistakes, right? And of course, the critical thinkers also uh, are able to methodically and consistently approach issues, right? And they usually avoid jumping to conclusion too soon, and they always adjust expectations in light of new information. So I think these are the abilities can be done by a critical thinkers, right? So what to do to improve our critical thinking? What should we have to do? I think, according to my belief, recognizing assumptions is very essential. Assumptions are something we all make, right? And often without realizing it, of course. And we need to consider what assumptions are pertinent to our issue. We need to separate facts from opinion, and also we need to look for opposing stances, right? And then we also have to improve our critical thinking by doing argument evaluation. Here we need to analyze claims critically, and also we need to assess accurately and impartially. And I do believe people will make arguments to persuade us to have a certain beliefs or behave a certain way, right? And you need to watch out for persuasive techniques, and also uh, you need to assist. You need to avoid any untruth argument, right? Uh, but I do believe by watching out for strong emotions, I think this might make difficult view an argument, right? And then we also need to improve our critical thinking by draw in inferences. Right? Inferences are assertions founded upon knowledge or belief, and then we need to make a rational inferences using all the information at our disposal, right? And what skills do we need for critical thinking? Do you have any idea? What skills do we need? It's challenging to improve on something we can't identify. Even if we desire to become a better critical thinker, um, by analyzing a scenario, analyzing an issue, and the fact, analyze the data, or analyze something that support evidence uh, is the key that we need to know as a critical thinking. And in its ideal form, critical thinking only considers fact, and also it is conducted objectively. And of course, it should be done without regard to the sentiment, without regard to the sentiments of beliefs and or prejudices, right? And here we can only act rationally and intelligently. Now, if you think critically, for example, a young child who uh, lacks of these skills, usually they think tells their parents have told them, led to the maybe like to the tooth fairy, to leave money beneath their pillow. Um, on the other hand, a critical thinker can soon conclude that the likelihood of such a thing is probably remote, and even if they had a few dollars hidden under their pillow, And what are the best critical thinking techniques according to you? Do you have any ideas? Please give comments if you have some, right? So, although there is no a unified definition of what constitutes critical thinking, and we have narrowed it down to the following uh, skills that I need to share to you with some friend of mine, and you can develop your critical thinking by connecting them with yourself, right? So the first thing that I would like to share to you about best critical thinking techniques is we need to have an ability, a technique to identify. The first is about identification. Identifying the circumstance or identify the issue and any potential contributing element is the first stage of the critical thinking process, right? So yeah, we can start to explore an issue, um, and also we can start to explore the possibilities to solve the issue. So if we have a clear image of the situation and the people, the group that maybe influence us, so that's why we need to have identification techniques. And also, the best technique that we need to have is research. We not, sometimes there are independent research skills out there, and I think they are really essential when comparing viewpoints on a particular subject. And the data and figures that support an argument maybe out of the context sometimes, or it is dubious sources, because arguments are supposed to persuade. And the best defense against this is independent verification. You know, we need to track down the information, the sources, and assess it, right? And the third is identifying biases. You know, even the most intelligent people, they can struggle with the skill of identifying biases. You know, strong critical thinkers try to assess information objectively, usually, but we need to consider ourselves a judge who wants to assess the argument by made the argument made by each side, and then while also we need to count for any biases that the party may have, you know. So that is what it means, identifying biases. And then we also must have a technique about inference, you know. And I think this is another crucial talent for mastering critical thinking, you know. I think this is the capacity to infer and make inferences from the data provided. And there isn't always a summary of the information that explains what it implies, but uh, usually we frequently have to evaluate the information provided and also make a judgment based on numerical fact, right? So when analyzing a scenario, the capacity to infer will enable us to extrapolate and um, identify potential outcomes, right? Because it is also crucial to remember that not every inference will be accurate, right? So you need to remember that not every inference will be accurate. For example, you could assume someone is overweight if you read that their weight may be around 320 pounds. But you know, on the other hand, such as height and body composition may cause that conclusion to change. You know, so this is can be considered as uh, error erroneous in inferences. You know, and then the other best technique that need to be done need to be owned by a critical thinker is the ability to determine relevance. You know, uh, finding the most crucial information for your attention when faced with a difficult situation is, you know, one of the hardest components of thinking critically. And in many cases, you know, you will be presented with information that can appear significant, but yeah, it might be just a small piece of knowledge to consider. And then another thing that we need to have is another techniques that we need to have as a critical thinker is curiosity. You know, at the beginning, I have talked a little bit about curiosity, and you know, even uh, it is quite simple to accept everything that is said to you, that is said to us at face value. You know, doing it might lead to a disaster. You know, when faced with a situation that calls for critical thinking, of course, right? And we are all innately inquisitive. You know, as many parents, for example, um, who have dealt with a barrage of why, you know, and usually as we age, you know, it's easy to fall into the habit of suppressing our curiosity. But that is not a successful strategy for critical thinking, you know. And another technique is analysis. Here, what I mean by analysis, we need to have the capacity to thoroughly study something and then We need to be an issue. We need to have a collection of data. We need to have a tags, right? And I think it's a component of critical thinking, right? And analytical thinkers also can evaluate information, and I think they also must be able to decipher its consequences, and also they must be able to effectively communicate those conclusions to others, right? And that is what it means analysis. And other techniques to be owned by critical thinker is creativity. And here what I mean, creativity and invention are, frequent components of critical thinking. You may need to identify patterns in the data you are examining, or you are developing on an original solution, right? And I think all of this requires a creative vision that can adopt a method that it is distinct from all previous methods that we have ever discussed. And then the other techniques, probably open-mindedness. You must set aside any preconceptions or prejudices and study the data you are given to think critically. And here you must be impartial in your evaluations of the ideas. And I think this is the most important thing, is it has to be owned by critical thinker, is the ability to uh, do problem solving. Problem solving entails understanding a situation, and then also coming up with a solution. Because it is put into action, and evaluating how well it worked, of course, right? So that's why nowadays it's paramount to be someone who can do more than critically analyze materials. And of course, they must also be able to think of workable solution for that, right? And that's what I mean by the best technique must be owned by a critical thinker. And also, here I would like to discuss to you about um, some obstacles or the barriers to critical thinking. Different barriers to critical thinking might interfere with the effectiveness of critical thinking. As an individual, you must become aware of these obstacles or these barriers to combat, and remove them, of course, right? Yeah. So, and here I would like to share to you the barriers to some barriers to critical thinking. The first is about egocentric mentality. I think you have ever said this phrase before. Here, what I mean by egocentricity is, in critical thinking, is a natural propensity that is often difficult to resist anyway. Such barrier forces the individuals to focus on oneself, and they prevent them from it prevent them from empathizing with others, or being able to comprehend their concerns. And one of the biggest roads, one of the biggest roadblocks for this is to critical thinking can be one's ego, of course, right? And I think this is more of a character problem, if I put it to my mind. And even after numerous tries to change, yeah, it may be challenging to do so, right? So such people make it uncomfortable for others to work with them in team, because they are unable to consider viewpoints and emotion of others, right? And that is what it means, egocentric mentality. And the other one that I need to share to you for barrier to critical thinking is group thinking. Another dangerous barrier to critical thinking is what I say just now, group thinking. It's likewise very unhealthy. For example, in one particular condition, the individual lacks of independent judgment in any event. And I do believe to overcome this, each group member must take a stand. They must reflect, and also they need to articulate their views, their beliefs, and also their opinions. Yeah? And I do believe this obstacle exemplifies the adage, too many cooks spoil the broth, as there is no individual activity taken by the person, right? That what I mean is good thinking. And the other one is about um, drone mentality. And I do believe you have ever heard what does it mean drone mentality, right? This is characterized by a failure to concentrate during critical meetings, meetings and talks at work, for example. Um, During the daily life, monotonous tasks frequently cause people to develop a drone mentality, right? And then the other one is about conditioning to socialization. Many of us tend to think within our comfort zones. I do believe you also do the same, and I also do the same. And we often abstain from making, from thinking outside those boundaries because of social pressure. And social conditioning also create barriers to critical thinking by causing us to stereotype the object, and people around us um, can make unwarranted assumptions. So to get over this tendency and challenging barriers, cultural and social awareness, I think it is really, really necessary. And the next one is for barriers to critical thinking is bias experience in nature. I do believe bias experience in nature here is one of the largest obstacles to to critical thinking. And I think it's because it is having personal biases, because they prevent someone from making fair, they prevent someone from unbiased, and also they prevent someone from transparent conclusions. So that's why it hinders the person's ability to to make sound decisions by using logic, by using experience, and also by using their common sense. Right? And another barrier is about stress. At work, at school, and in other situations. We may have too many deadlines to meet. And to accomplish, which impact our ability to use our critical thinking. However, working under pressure and against the tight deadlines usually allows us to, and allows some people to own their critical thinking skills. And here we frequently choose the option of doing the work without strategic consideration or without long-term visions, when time is limited. And I think that line must be fulfilled here, and this is where the obstacle to critical thinking appears. And the other barriers for critical thinking is about arrogance. Arrogance is definitely negative attitude. And I think um, that frequently impairs one's capacity for for critical thought, and I do believe it creates a person with a close perspective and also the conviction that they already know everything, and I think they do not require for the educations for that. And this is a kind of arrogance that causes a person to fail over the long term. You know why? Because it closes off their learning opportunities, and also it prevents them from understanding the understanding the rewards and also the advantages of critical thinking, right? And the other barrier is fierce nature. So here, what do I mean by fierce nature? uh, being stubborn is one of the barriers to critical thinking, since someone with that personality has their own set of ideologies and also beliefs. And individuals who strive for excellent critical thinking, must be open to change and let go of their current beliefs. Yeah, so they can see that the world is highly fluid and fast-paced and necessitates flexibility and adaptability. You know? And the next one is for the things that vary our critical thinking is about fear. I think uh, during our lifetime, fear frequently serves as a roadblock. Yeah, not only to our critical thinking, but also to growth and to our development. And I think the fear is lack of confidence, lack of motivation, and also lack of agility that makes them less able to think creatively and also produce ideas and tactics. And I think this and the fear can arise from many causes, maybe because of anxiety, because of despair, low. It could be caused by low self-esteem, and probably other similar personal factors that impact other areas of life. You know, so there what I means other barriers for critical thinking, and I think the other that is quite popular that vary our critical thinking is being a lazy. Being a lazy, right? And a person who wants to excel in critical thinking must conduct extensive research. They also must read materials and be open to learning new things. And if not ready to do it, uh, they this can become a barrier for them, right? So those are the barriers for critical thinking, right? And the things ever being asked by a student of mine also is about uh, how to to find out things critically is by asking questions or by asking the right question. Uh, if you want to be a critical thinker, you know, because it can make the difference between successful and unsuccessful critical thinking. So here we need to choose the right questions that can be incredibly effective in the critical thinking process, right? So, for example, we need to make a free form inquiries, inquiries. Um, Here, as a critical thinker, we cannot accept the least amount of information, and from whoever or whatever you are questioning is, right? And Yes or no answers can seriously slow down the process of receiving the information and answers you need. So here, that's why you are encouraged to ask open-ended questions. So here, asking questions that will not only lead to the information you need, but also it reveals more than what we were seeking is a key. So here are two examples of what open-ended inquiries look like. Um, Instead of asking, "Is this the goal of the scenario?" you better ask, "What is the point of this scenario?" Right? Instead of asking, "Is this your favorite aspect of the scenario?" you better ask, "What do you like best about the situation?" And so it's quite different, right? I repeat again, if you instead of asking, "Is this the goal of the scenario?" and much better you ask, "What is the point of this scenario?" So that the second question is much more critical. Another example, like, is this your favorite aspect of the scenario? And much better you ask critically, what do you like best about this situation, right? So that is the um, things that make free form of inquiries to ask the right questions critically. And the second is about steering clear of direct inquiries. Here we must escape from our bias and also view things from a different perspective to be a critical thinker, right? It is crucial to avoid guiding the inquiry in the direction of what we want it to go, of course, right? And we need to avoid here also we need to avoid using judgmental language in our inquiries, and then we need to keep them as impartial as possible. For example, you ask, "What do you think is the best diet that is available?" Instead of, you know, do not do you don't you believe that a vegan diet is the healthiest diet? So when you ask, "What do you think is the best diet that is available?" it's more critical than when you ask, "Don't you believe that the vegan diet is the healthiest diet?" Right? Or another example of critical question is, "What is the country's current state like?" Right? What is the country's current state like? Or what is the politics situations currently look like? All right. So instead of us, "How awful is the country situation right now?" This is, I think, less critical, right? And also here we need to identify the parameters of our inquiries. What should we do? What should be done? Both guiding a question and leaving it to open might work against the attainment of our goals. That's why in some cases maybe we may need to apply our critical thinking with the purpose and the direction. But we need also to make sure that we establish a precise structure within our queries can be addressed, um, of course, in this way and in this situation, right? So I think the answer can become efficient and fast in this way. So, for example, you ask, which Indonesian male tennis player is your favorite, and if you ask, who is your favorite tennis player, so I think which Indonesian male tennis player is your favorite is much more critical, right? Or where would you choose to reside if you could live any place um, in in South America? Instead instead of asking, where would you live if you could live anywhere? So I think the first question is more critical than the second question, right? And you may continue asking questions until you get what you need, right? So here, when you ask only superficial inquiries, and I think it's simple for the information sources you are examining to decide, and also, yeah, we hold the knowledge we need, and um, you know, instead of planning our inquiries in advance, we need to be sure to, to go deeper in the direction of the information we want to follow. And then I do believe once we have our response, we have once we go back to ask more general questions, and I think once again to obtain greater understanding of the entire situation, right? So that's, I think, need to be done to be more critical, especially for inquiring the questions or asking the questions. And every response to our query needs to be supported by credible fact and credible sources. Um, Here we need to make sure uh, that we avoid believing hearsay. Hearsay, and before you accept the information offered to you, I think much better you find the studies, you find the science, and several testimonials, right? Because you need to be, and I think you need also we need to determine whether the material is accurate or not. We need to look at numerous unrelated and diverse sources. Also, we need to consider the opposing viewpoint, um, and the fact that support their assertion. You know, and the example of critical thinking question types, maybe the question types that need to be asked. The first is about open-ended questions, because this is really inspiring in-depth responses, right? So, for example, what do you think about current environmental situations, and how would you try to fix it? And this is more critical, right? Or what about your work most inspires you, and what about that inspire you so much? Right? So this is, I think, more critical. And also, the question should be with outcomes that show character attributes. So here, for example, you are asking, what would you tell a 5-year-old about coding, for example, right? And or what two exercises would you pick if you could only do two, or maybe stay in a shape, and you can give the reason why. Or you can ask, like, tell me about a time when you had to make a choice based on unreliable data, and how did you act toward that? All right. So that's, I think, more critical questions than when you are asked when you are asking yes no questions. And I think things that we need to types of critical question that we need also speculative queries. Sometimes people made up examples. For example, how would you react if you learned that a buddy was having an affair with the spouse of another friend? I think this is more critical and quite critical. And how would you respond if two of your employees under your supervision start yelling at each other in the office, right? And what consequences might there be? Right? So this more speculative, right? And I think the most important thing need to be understood when we are asking questions. When we are asking critical thinking questions, reflective inquiries. You know, Here, what personal benefit have you derived from this experience? Do you believe there was a more efficient approach to do what you did? Is the example. And if so, how would you apply it going forward? Right? So this question is more critical when you compare, for example, by asking, um, do you apply anything in the future? So this, I think, less critical. Or the example is, how has the procedure facilitated your ability to do related tasks in the future? So I think this will be more critical if you ask the question like this. So this is, I mean, a reflective inquiries, right? And we also need to be critical thinker. We need to be critical listener. So we need to have critical listening. So what does it mean, critical listening? Here it's not a popular as an active or empathetic listening, right? And active and empathetic listening usually have positive connotations, but when we think about the word critical, they may not be true. You can find definition like offering harsh or disapproving comment or judgment. Especially when we search the term critical, you know, I think this definition is what fuels an inaccurate notion, and uh, if you search for critique, I think it is defined as a detailed examination and assessment. But if you prefer to think about the grammar of the English language, you may think of critical listening as a verb that means to evaluate and to assess, which has a more accurate meaning. And critical listening is applying methodical, right, through thoughts and to reason, uh, to determine if the message or if the message makes sense in a light of objective facts, right? So, for example, although we can develop it with experience, but critical listening is not always easy. Yeah. So, for some people, never acquire these talents. Instead, they believe whatever they hear, even when it conflicts, or even when it is conflict, and then with what they already know. But when someone receives information who cannot determine if it is true or accurate, problems may arise. So there are some critical listening skills there that we need to use when we conduct thorough analysis and assessment. Here I determined five listening skills. The first is determining the logic's persuasiveness. Examining the potential biases and assumptions. The third, considering the data. Um, the fourth, examining fit to goals. And the last, or the fifth, is evaluating its completeness, right? So here, complex messages might make it more challenging to listen critically. And some presenters may intentionally make their statement difficult to understand to avoid scrutinization. For example, for instance, an administrator presenting a budget can use complicated language and technical jargon to make it challenging for listeners to understand or to comprehend the proposed budget, and also over insightful inquiries, right? And also there are other approaches to listening for which we will not go into detail. Open listening, necessary for brainstorming or idea development, to generate more ideas. And you know empathetic listening, the thing that used when coaching a team members. I think this is need uh, to be adopted. And I do believe by adopting the most suit listening approach for the current situation, it's really essential, right? And that why means the listening skills we need to have for critical thinking. And what is the critical thinking framework? For some people, I think they have different framework about critical thinking. Probably they have the element of thought, intellectual standard, and also intellectual trait, right? But I think those parts must be able to recognize the different parts of it, especially the their thinking, and evaluate how well they employ each other, right? So I think those parts, element of thought, intellectual standard, and intellectual traits. I think there must be element of, there must be reasoning for them, you know. So, like element of thought, this is related to reasoning. So I think there are some uh, parts or components of thinking according to my mind. The first is about every argument has a purpose, and every argument also attempt to establish some truth, and also answer some questions, or address the issue, and every argument makes an assumption, also every argument takes a point of view. um, it also provides facts, information, and proof supports inferences. And I think other components that need to be understood is about language, culture, concept, and also ideas for all level or all serve with the purpose of expressing and from reasoning, you know. And then maybe other components that we need to think about is, all forms of thinking called inferences or interpretations. mm, it allows us to reach conclusion, provide context to fact, and I think the most important component is every argument also has a point, and also it has implication and also results, right? And that's the element of thought. And the intellectual standard, here the level of reasoning is determined by using the intellectual standards that apply to this component, you know. um, I do believe knowing these requirements, it demands the ability to think critically, right? So um, the ultimate objective here is, of course, it is for the norms of reasoning to be ingrained in all thinking, so they may serve as the roadmap for ever improving logic. And the criteria for intellectual standard, there must be, clarity. Yeah, here you must be able to give more details. You must be able to provide an example of what you mean, and also um, there must be criteria about accuracy. How might we verify something? How might we determine that if that is the issue or the case, and also for the accuracy, we need to know how might we confirm or examine something, you know. And there must be also precision, you know. uh, Here the precision could be more detailed, could please elaborate, you know, and also could be more specific, right? And also there must be relevance, you know. Intellectual standards should be relevance, you know. Here what connect We need to question the connection that does have to the issue, you know. And also we need to think relevance that have to the query, and we need to have relevant aid in solving the problems, right? And also for the intellectual standard, there must it must be depth, you know, that especially the depth in challenges, and also the depth of the nuance in the issue, and the depth of the challenge that need to be overcome, you know. And also intellectual standard must have the criteria about breadth, you know. Breadth to consider these things from, you know, from different angles, and also uh, the breadth to take different viewpoints into account. Do we need to consider things from, you know, from other angles? And also there must be logic, you know. I believe logic here must make sense taken as a whole, and also logic must be related to the opening and closing paragraphs that make sense altogether. And also logic should be the evidence support what you are saying, right? And also it has significance, you know. The other criteria is about significance, you know. Significance is, I think, is the most crucial issue to consider, you know, because in this there must be main concept to concentrate on. And I think also it must contain the details for the most crucial one. And the other criteria is about fairness, you know. Here reasonable fairness should be reasonable in the situation, right? And also fairness should be considered about others think thinking, you know. And also fairness should be the goal, reasonable given in the circumstance, right? And also fairness should be consistent with knowledgeable usage, and also should be consistent to do to twist them in to suit the people's need, you know. So that is about fairness. Then the criteria of the intellectual standard. And intellectual traits, I think, when the standard of thinking are consistently applied to the component of thinking, you know. And I think there must be intellectual qualities need to be developed, you know. For example, like humility, bravery, and empathy, independence, integrity, persistence, and also faith in reason. And the last is fairness, as the previous criteria that we've been talking about. And I think the qualities of an experience for a critical thinker here should be understood clearly. You know, regular application of the intellectual qualities usually result in a well-developed critical thinker, especially those of them who can pose important queries and issues, and also they must able to formulate them clearly and exactly, right? And also a critical thinker who can collect and evaluate pertinent data, when the use of abstract concept to understand them well. And also critical thinker, develop critical thinker also have um, a person who can arrive at a well thought out of conclusions, solutions, and evaluate them, considering pertinent standards and criteria. And also they must be able to consider various ways of thinking, with an open mind, recognizing and evaluating um, various ways as necessary based on their premises, based on their implications, and also they based on their applications. And I think um, well-developed critical thinkers must be able to effectively communicate with others and must be able to come up with the solutions to challenging issues, right? So that is about the intellectual traits. All right, and now let's talk about real news and versus fake news. I do believe you may think about your media savvy for a second, right? Now, are you able to differentiate or to distinguish between a reliable news source and a creative advertisement? Um, I have ever read an article, and this article, based on a recent Stanford University research, it says that 82% of the kids polled couldn't tell the difference between a sponsor piece and a news item. You know, schools may contribute to the issue by reducing the formal education of critical thinking skills, and they assume that today's digital native teenagers can distinguish between the two without practice and without in instruction. But here, we need to excel in a variety of areas. But however, we have, we have honed the skills we are proficient in. So how can we then practice differentiating facts from fiction? We can talk to our family, we can talk to our friends about the media sources. That is one approach to do this, and we must learn how and why people choose the sources of the information they do. And also, we can ask each other inquiries regularly for analyzing sources. And I also think that we need do we do our friends have all the knowledge? Have you ever questioned about it? Um, it's so alluring to think that our pals or our friends, our colleagues are the beginning and the end of the world. You know, uh, Friends or colleagues are undoubtedly valuable, and you know it's really beneficial to consider how a group affects our life. When we need to take a hard look at our friends or at our colleagues to learn how to apply critical thinking in daily life. Are there any forbidden topics in our social circle? Are we required to behave or appear in a certain way? Sometimes when a group member decides something in a cool, in a calm situation, and I do believe everyone tries to live up to the standard, no matter what each individual thinks, whether the issue that there are numerous ways to define in almost every circumstance, or what one person considers stupid may be cool to another, right? And I think prove our capacity to reframe how we perceive the world based on our terms. Here that's what I mean. Um, Here how we sometimes need um, to think about whether our colleagues or friends have all the knowledge, right? And also, by finding a time when our friends only see the bad things, you know, and also is there might be other alternatives that more optimistic perspective, right? And here we may not be ready to express an opposing viewpoint yet. Uh, just learn to consider multiple angles here, right? And I think also sometimes there is a fallacies uh, in real news and also fake news. Here sometimes common misconceptions known as fallacies will impeach the logic of our argument. You know, because a fallacious argument might be unfounded or irrelevant, and they are simple to spawn to spot since they come with no supporting data, and or they like avoid common fallacies in our assertion and watch out for them in other situations, right? So they're what I mean by fallacies. And there are several common examples of everyday fallacies. For example, like the fallacy of the false start. You know, this fallacy occurs when our opponent misrepresent or oversimplifies our argument. Um, it can be done by constructing a straw man. Yeah, what I mean here, make make it easier to attack or refute. And speakers who employ this fallacy usually present superficially similar but ultimate unjustified version of our actual position, to create the impression that they can easily defeat us rather than thoroughly address it. For example, um, Bob says we ought to pay someone to overhaul our website, in my opinion. And Brian replied, "You are suggesting that we spend our money on outside vendors rather than expanding our design team in the long term. That will be detrimental to our business." Right? So, this could be considered as the policy of the false start, right? And there, there is also what is called the bandwagon fallacy. So yes, statement is not always true because many people believe it's so. Though it's frequently used as a standalone defense of the validity of an argument, and I think popularity alone is insufficient. Yeah, and I think this type of argument doesn't consider whether the population validating the argument is truly qualified to do, whether there is opposing evidence. Right? For example, like Billboard, a long time ago, I think until now also are objectively the best type of advertising because most people think that businesses should spend more money on them, right? So that is about bandwagon fallacy, and there must be also the fallacy of relying on authority. So here, while not always incorrect, appeals to authority can quickly become dangerous when too much trust is placed in one's person's judgment. This happens especially when that person is attempting to justify something outside their areas of expertise. For example, we should continue utilizing the same method even if our Q4 figures were significantly lower than unusual because our CEO Barbara, feel this is the best course of action. This is an example, and also false dilemma fallacy. I do believe you have ever heard this. This widespread misconception is led by splitting into complicated issues, into um, two sides that are essentially at odds with one another, right? And I think the false dilemma fallacy holds that there are only two conceivable outcomes. They are mutually compatible rather than realizing that most issues, may be thought upon from a range of viewpoint. And maybe we can see the example uh, about this later on. And also there must be fallacy of quick generalization. This error occurs, when broad assumptions, are made based on shaky or insufficient data, on, or in other words, maybe they dismiss plausible counter-arguments and make assumptions about the truth of a claim that has some but insufficient evidence to support, right? Uh, for example, two members of the team in a company who took public speaking training have developed into more motivated workers, and this demonstrates why need to increase employee engagement, and this also demonstrates why public speaking lessons should be made mandatory for the entire organization. So that's what it means, the fallacy of quick generalizations. And also there must be a slothful induction fallacy. I think this is the opposite of the previously mentioned fallacy of quick generalization, is slothful induction. I think this fallacy happens when there is enough logical evidence to conclude that something is true, but the person contests the conclusions, attributing the result to chance or something unrelated. For example, even if every project John has managed in the last 2 years has run way behind schedule, and I still think we can blame this on uncontrollable events rather than his project management skills, right? And I think the correlation and causation fallacy, I think, is also need to be considered, because if two things appear to be related, It doesn't necessarily follow that one of them caused the others. You know, even though it may appear to be a simple fallacy to identify, and I think it can be difficult, to do so in practice. This happens especially if you truly want to discover causation between two pieces of information to support your claim. For example, our blog's readership increased in April, and we also altered the color of the header of our blog, and I think this indicates that the change in the blog header's color resulted in a viewer view in April, right? And also, there is an anecdotal evidence fallacy. I think this fallacy uses examples from personal experience in place of rational backing, and argument that mainly depend on anecdotal evidence could overlook the fact that a single case cannot provide proof for a larger sections. For example, after making the whole text on the landing page bright red, one of our clients witnessed a twofold boost conversion. The try and true method for boosting conversation is to make all text red, and there must be also the middle ground fallacy. And I think this fallacy assumes that a compromise between two radically opposing viewpoints is always true. And I think in this type of argument, compromise between the two extremes is fallacious because it ignores the possibility that one or both could be completely correct or incorrect. And for example, Jessica must be a successful entrepreneur because she sold her first startup to powerful technology corporation, and here she disregard the fact that since then, four of her ventures have failed, right? And the fallacy of personal skepticism, also doesn't necessarily follow that something is false if it is difficult to understand how or why it is true. A claim cannot be declared valid because a single instance or widespread ignorance. For example, when Joshua believes that changing the company website will not bring any value because it's hard to understand how and why this will bring any value, right? Okay, everyone, so that's what I can share for this video about uh, critical thinking, and for the next video I will be talking more about um, cognitive biases in critical thinking. So for this video, I think we have been discussing a lot of things, and I hope this can give you more understanding how critical thinking works, right? And thank you for watching and listening, and salute.
Subscribe dong. Ngeri, ngeri, ngeri.